with various persons living with disability. So with these really, really knowledgeable experts in our midst today, we are going to tease out what the disability space has been, you know, for persons staying in this area since many institutions decided to move online. My name is Millicent Ajay, and I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Ashesi University. I'm an adjunct lecturer also with the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. And so let's just kick right in and begin with Alex. So there's been a lot of conversation about moving online and how online is going to open up, you know, accessibility for various persons to access education. This morning, our minister spoke about 3 major areas that is informing government decision. He spoke about access, he spoke about quality, and he spoke about relevance. And I would want to pull that into our conversation to ask. And each of you will have 5 minutes to respond based on the various areas that you operate in. I want to begin with Alex, especially in the area of policy, in the area of the persons with other abilities, you know, space. What has been some of the major emerging opportunities with our move to online education, and what has been some of the setbacks based on your own experience working in this field?
Okay, thank you so much, Millicent, and thanks to Ashesi University for the opportunity. Just to go to your question, I often would like to start from where persons with disabilities in particular get to enter the space from the policy or the legal framework point of view. It is from that angle that they are able to get into the space, and then they are able to access what they ought to be accessing. So when you take the Ghana 1992 Constitution, for instance, a careful study of Article 25 that speaks to issues of education and raises few issues which are very salient to the subject for today. So when you check Article 25, Clause 1, is Clause 1, subclause A, B, and C speak to 3 different issues. A speaks to the issue of ensuring that everybody has the opportunity, an equal opportunity being made available to all. And in this case, when they say all, they actually mean all persons who require education. When you take subsection B, it speaks to senior higher education, seeking to indicate that indeed we ought to ensure that senior higher education in its various forms, that is one thing it identifies. It identifies the fact that senior higher education might be in diverse forms, but in spite of the form, it should be made appropriately available and accessible to all persons. And when you go to C and D of the same clause, it actually speaks to the issue of higher education at the tertiary level, ensuring that higher education is also accessible and made progressively free for all manner of persons. The same article actually refers to the education, the access to education actually being free at the basic level for all. When you take Section 18 of the Persons with Disabilities Act, it again emphasizes the fact that persons with disabilities should have free access to education. And the good thing about that section actually is that it places no limitation on the level at which the individual with disability can seek to aspire to acquire education. Additionally, when you take issues of access to information generally, where education is concerned, You have the Article 24 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, entreating all state parties to guarantee total access to education for persons with disabilities, in spite of their economic situations. The other aspect of access that our international treaty, an international treaty of Ghana deals with, and in this case is the Marrakesh Treaty, which Ghana ratified in October 2017, that deals with giving persons with visual-related disabilities total access to written information in whatsoever form it appears. And it takes away the issue of copyright barriers that might tend to hinder access. Having looked at these existing legislations that seek to create what I'll say the door through which persons with disabilities can go through to get education, you also look at the environment within which they ought to access education. In particular, when you look at Ghana's current focus on internet access or web access, it is instructive to indicate that one of the key policies that exist to guide all and sundry in developing web content is the WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guide. That is to ensure at any given time that web content that is developed is made accessible. Now, these for me actually give a great opportunity for persons with disabilities to easily access education without a lot of barriers that hitherto they tend to face in the built or physical environment. Today, if you have education moved onto e-learning platforms, the first issue that you end up knocking off will be the restriction that the physical environment brings to the individual. As we have had in the past, persons with disabilities have been limited by way of the institutions they can attend simply because the physical built environment has not been friendly. Let's take that aside and realize that once there is e-access, the individual with disability, in spite of where they are seated, are able to easily access materials. Now, in reference to accessing materials, particularly for persons with visual impairment, the issue around the cost of producing accessible materials, particularly in Braille, has also been another hurdle that persons with visual impairment in particular have had to scale oftentimes. The opportunity to learn via various e-learning platforms, again, mostly sets aside that particular hurdle. Since e-learning actually affords the individual with disability to access the learning material in a cost-effective and efficient manner, in fact, at no additional cost to the individual, ensuring that the information that they ought to access is being made available. Having said so, the only challenge I can see in our way is the challenge of our attitude. All these years that we have talked about the various barriers to education, among others, for persons with disabilities, has it been an issue of a grave challenge in relation to accessing sufficient resources, or it has been an issue with regards to the appropriate attitude that ensures that the individual providing educational service thinks about the individual with disability? I think that we have gotten to that point where e-learning is ensuring that indeed it is about the attitude, it is about thinking about the individual with disability at any point in time to ensure that they are also on board. E-learning if we are able to ensure that we are indeed thinking about persons with disabilities as we plan and think about e-learning that has very limited barriers, and that comes at a less cost to the individual with disability and the service provider, we would end up ensuring that we have a lot more persons with disabilities enroll in education from the basic level to the tertiary level. With these few words, I would rest my case here for now and then
thank you
come
very
in
much.
later.
Thank you very much, Alex. And if you can please adjust your phone so that we can see you. We are seeing your ceiling, but not your face. We would like to see you. To viewers, didn't welcome you. You are very welcome, all our attendees. I'm gonna move on now to Angie. Angela does a lot of work also in the space with persons with other forms of disability in terms of teacher education, working with governments to give support. So Angela, over to you now. From Alex, if I may add a few things before Angela, you come in. Alex mainly is making the case of this is a good thing that has happened because it removes the physical barriers that persons with disability would have to navigate, but the only, age-old problem of attitude is what still remains, right? Whether we are being very intentional as we are moving online, that we are carrying these persons along. So I'm curious to hear what you also have to add on, Angela.
Thank you so much, Millicent, and I'm really grateful to Ashesi for this opportunity. Working in the field of disabilities, I would like to start with a quote from Helen Keller, a deaf-blind activist, who said that until the great mass of the people shall be filled with a sense of responsibility for each other's welfare, social justice can never be attained. And so here we are, looking at the opportunities that are there for our students with disabilities. I will just give you a few examples. I just met one student last week who was telling me that, Madam, we are excited that we are home. However, this is the challenge. Even when we were in school, we didn't have the books to read because whilst governments were providing the opportunities for other students, those who are for those who don't have disabilities, we are struggling to even get that opportunity by getting access to the information. And I think that is a great need for our people. He also said that I am a student with low vision. And with low vision, I read a font size of 24. And here I am, when books come in, it's a font size of 12. All I need is one assistive device, maybe a magnifier, maybe for the books to be enlarged for me, but I don't have that opportunity. Why am I saying all this? These are students who are part of us and they need support to be able to live independent lives in society. They need to go through the ranks of education so that they can also make it in life. However, there is a denial. We are excited at this point in time that this opportunity has come for us to correct the wrongs. So we see, for me, I see students with disabilities as someone who has been put in the middle of the ocean to swim and the person doesn't know how to swim. How do we support these people? And I think that is exactly what Alex is saying. We are talking about the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which says that we need to ensure inclusive, equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. Is it for all? No, not for those with disabilities. We are not saying that governments or other institutions are not doing much. I know that globally, there's a lot of focus now on how best we can help students. In the end, and I'll use Ghana as an example. Ghana has started something on the TV, and I think we have also rolled out the radio programs now. However, those using the television, those who are not, those who don't have disabilities are able to access it. Those who have disabilities are not able to access. I think it was just about 2 weeks ago that we started looking at those who are deaf so that they can use the sign language and then also comprehend whatever is being taught. But when you have a child or a student who has visual impairment sitting there, he is only focused on listening to what the teacher is teaching. And when you are teaching and you make, you just say, we put one there, over there, down there, how does the student get that information? And so as much as possible, we have to tailor the whole system to also suit them so that together we can support these learners. I think that a lot is happening, but we still feel that our students with disabilities have been left behind, and it's high time we support them to move to the next rank by ensuring that we provide access. You know, there should be that accessibility. And when we talk about accessibility, we are looking at the devices that Alex spoke about earlier. We are also looking at quality. We are looking at the fact that sometimes even the materials that are being taught, is the content accessible for these students? And if it is not, how do we modify it to suit them so that together we can write the same exam and we can all move on to the next level? So on that note, I would like to end here. And then when we come back, I'll continue to add more. Thank you very much, Millicent.
Thank you very much, Angela. I hear the same, trend, intentionality to bring persons with different abilities along as we plan in all our planning as we move online. Derek, you do a lot of work with various stakeholders, not just the students, but their parents, with different organizations who work with persons with disability. What are you seeing? I know you do a lot of work also in developing new technologies. What is that space looking like for you? Angela has talked about access in terms of the tools that they can use to also tap into all of these different ways of doing things now in the educational space. How is it looking on the stakeholder side beyond the student?
All right, thank you so much, Millicent, for this opportunity. I got the real opportunity to study at Ashesi, and I think that this is one of the best moments for me to be part of this conversation. Like you said, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of stakeholders, and I'm sure my seniors on this panel have probably done more work than I have. But my little opportunity that I've had, I've worked with a lot of parents, mostly single mothers. I've worked with employers. I've worked with schools. I've worked with teachers. I've worked with the special education unit. And it has taught me a lot in this space. I think that one of the things that this transition has presented is a unique opportunity to discuss how individuals with disabilities are educated in Ghana and Africa. Prior to COVID-19, only 5% of individuals with disabilities made it into higher education in Ghana, according to research by students in the University of Ghana. This is not different in any other African country. Actually, UNESCO reported that only 5% of adults with disabilities can read or write in Africa. That's a big gap, clearly a big gap in education for persons with disability. And I think that the transition to online, right, widens the gap even more than the opportunity it presents. Why do I say this? And then I want to start talking about this issue from the perspective of parents and families. Actually, the World Health Organization estimates that about 80% of persons with disabilities who are poor are from developing countries in Africa. The stigma, the struggles, the unavailable support, social support, makes it extremely difficult for families, individuals, to actually meet their daily needs. For most families, the brick and mortar model, which was previously being practiced in our education model, was an opportunity for their financial burdens to be lessened, because in this case, students who go to school, they will get, if they are on the free education model, they get food to eat. At least if they're in the university, you as the parent gets the time to work, to provide, to get money to provide for the family. But now that schools have closed down and things are online, students have now returned home and parents are forced to sit at home and not work. So how do they even provide and cater for the family? How do they even get the money to afford the internet that they need? How do they even get the money to get the gadgets, the phone, the laptops that they need for the students to access this online content? Even if the platforms were accessible, there will be a lot of gaps for the parents to be able to meet, to be able to have access to inclusive and quality education. And so we talk about inclusive education in Ghana. When we talk about education there is a big gap, because currently 88% of children with disabilities are out of school in Ghana. And if they even get the chance to be in school, look at the gaps that they face, especially when they are now doing online. So you see that there is a clear challenge. And what we need to realize is that if education does not work in schools for these students, it will not work out of schools, right? And so what I am realizing, that this transition to online places a lot of emphasis on how indispensable technology has become for students with disability. And I think that Dr. Alex and Angela have mentioned this. But what I realized was, if you go to, let's say, some popular blind schools in Ghana to go and teach IT literacy, you will go through a difficult time to make that happen because of bureaucracy, because of the systems. Why do we still keep going with the old model of education, and why are we not allowing ourselves to change to a new way of doing things? The time has come for governments, the education services in African countries, to start having a conversation of how do we move from teaching and using resources like the Braille to how do we provide digital tools that allows the students to be able to start learning. Because the truth is, even if we advocate for technologies, for the laptops, the phones, most of the students will still face barriers because they won't know how to use them, right? And so when we talk about online transition, there are so many levels that are very complicated that we need to start looking at intentionally. Angela mentioned that schools, the government has started doing online TV. Why don't we focus on individual students, provide them with support staff or additional tuition so that they can do one-on-one lessons? And why don't we focus on their specific needs and meet those needs, rather than do it for everybody, which does not really help the people who need it the most? Now everybody starts talking about working remotely. How do we even prepare our students who are disabled to be relevant in a time like this? How do we if we keep doing the same thing that we are doing in our schools, we need to ask ourselves, does it support the students to be relevant for employers in a time like this? In a time like this, where persons who are not disabled are being laid off, how can we give our students that advantage to be able to be relevant for employers, right? And one of the things that we have been doing is ensuring that any individual disability we work with at least can do something with technology. Can we start having that conversation in our schools? Can we ensure that every student with autism, every student with cerebral palsy, every student with Down syndrome, every student who is deaf, every student who is blind can do something tangible with technology in a way that they can create opportunities for themselves, or they can be able to create value for employers, right? So there are different strategies that we need to start thinking about as higher education, as the government, the employers, the teachers, parents, that I hope that as we go on with this conversation, I'll be able to share. But I think that transitioning into online has created more gap than what even it used to be, and it wasn't pleasant at all.
Wow. And before I go to Alex for my next round of questions, I will ask, I'll follow up with you, Derek, and say that much as it's good to look at, this from an angle which doesn't, depict a one-size-fits-all, and it's very important that we look at the individual students. How feasible is this on the national level? Because we have several, like you indicated, we have 88% of children with disability out of school. Right now, with the rest who are within the school system somehow, if we are even take one school, if you're going to look at it from a single student perspective, how do we leapfrog? How do we make the impact that we are looking at with this additional layer of challenge that this online education has brought upon us?
I think it's a very, very good question. And I don't think that we can easily do that in a very short time. I think this is why we need to start having a conversation about moving from segregated education into a more inclusive environment where the students actually have friends that they can rely on, that they can work with. Right? So when you go to the visually impaired school, the coupon school for the blind, you have only blind students there. When school closes down and they have to go, they don't have any interaction with a sighted student. And so you cannot even get a sighted student to help you. But if we are able to set up an inclusive system, the students can rely on their friends for one support. There's a backlog of teachers who have been trained, who are not posted, who can be able to do community-based training for 5 to 10 students per community. That is more targeted and that is more intentional. And that ensures that the individual needs of the students are met. Currently, what we are doing at the University of Education, Winneba, is we have a group of about 25 students who run academic assistance programs for the visually impaired students and also other students with disabilities. They do weekly meetings with them, make sure that they can use the computer to solve the assignment, make sure that they have done the assignment, they understand what has been taught in the class during the week, right? How can we now scale such models, right? I think that that is where we have to start thinking about.
Right, right. Thank you very much, Derek. And I'll move to Angela also before I get to Alex. Angela, how has the teacher education space been like? Because much as, you know, the students who must be supported is very significant, the person doing the supporting, in this case, the teacher, you know, doing the teaching, how is that being done? How has, you know, there been any major conversation taking place as to we reimagining the way we train our teachers who are helping and supporting our students who have different forms of the
Thank you, Millicent. I would say that currently, I think since we are, I would say that it's all across Africa, but specifically I'm using Ghana because I'm here that the curriculum, as we all know, has been modified and we have a new curriculum that is rolling. Of course, most of these teachers, when they attend University of Education, we have what we call introduction to special education. So some way, somehow, people have the basics on how to work with students with disability. However, we need to train more teachers to really, you know, support the inclusive system. Currently, the research that I'm doing with UNICEF is on what we call the universal design for learning. And you could see that this is a program that looks at every child in the classroom and tries to put systems in place that all children will have access to the same subject that we are doing, but they have different ways of doing it. And so we look at multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression so that all children can have that opportunity. And so what we are looking at currently is that we are having a discussion with government to see how best we can include that aspect into the curriculum so that all these learners or the teachers could have that skill to be able to support these learners. I think that Derek had mentioned that when you go to a Cropon School for the Blind, we have students who only have visual impairment. But I know that in Ghana, we are also practicing inclusive education. We have Okwapiman School, which is doing that. I think the bottom line is that the opportunity has come for us to do things right. How we can get all these accessible, you know, formats available for our students so that they can be able to be at par with their friends who don't have disabilities, so that together, because we write the same exam, because we sit in the classroom with the same students, we don't want to be left behind. That is the word. No child should be left behind. Everything should be put in place so that they will also have access to quality education. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And I don't know.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, we'll get back to you shortly. Sorry for the hiccups in the internet.
Okay.
So, Derek.
On now, can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
So Millicent is
Yes,
back
we
now.
can hear you now.
Yeah,
Yes.
Millicent, we can.
Okay. There we go, right? With technology. So technology itself is not foolproof to all our solutions, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to transition now to Alex. And Alex, I want us from the high level policy standpoint, and I know you do a lot of work at that level in terms of advocacy for persons with disability in country. How do we now begin to look at, when it comes to higher education, how do we begin to reimagine how higher education can be done with our current, system, which is now becoming the new normal? How do we begin to reimagine the way we do teaching, the way we do learning, the way we do support, especially when it comes to high-level policy, when thinking at the higher education space, so that it's not policy is set, things are running before they become an afterthought. Oh, by the way, we have people who are not mainstream. How do we integrate them? How do we, on the high-level policy side, begin to reimagine education that is all-encompassing right at the beginning, that is inclusive to, all these persons with disability along?
Yeah, thank you, Millicent, for the question. And I think in answering the question, there are two initial things I'll indicate in relation to how do we begin this. First and foremost will be for us to pay attention to what my colleague Angela said in relation to the principles of the SDG, leaving no one behind. And that would be for policymakers and implementers to actually ensure that principle is being upheld. On the other side, or on the other hand, it will be important that we have persons with disabilities themselves, who I would call the end users, actually beginning to re-examine the glass from a half-full perspective as against a half-empty perspective. Because like I indicated earlier on in my presentation, from where I sit, technology affords us a great deal of opportunity than the world without technology has actually afforded us. So if I might give one quick example, at the University of Ghana, you have about 75 to 80% of the visually impaired students here using the computer, and quote and unquote, the ordinary computer, to do the examination. we actually had to go through a great deal of advocacy where the students themselves are concerned. We had to go through a great deal of counseling where the students themselves are concerned, giving them the confidence to utilize the newly identified means of reading and writing. Because the university together with other partners had actually removed the initial hurdle, one of the hurdles that Derek actually referred to. That is the knowledge on utilization, ensuring utilization through building knowledge capacity. The university and other partners had actually done so by ensuring that these students were trained. It was now left with the students having the confidence in moving away from what they have known since they started schooling as their main means of reading and writing that got them the grades. And once we were able to get a chunk of them to agree to this new means of reading and writing, and particularly doing it with exams, they themselves today are able to attest to the opportunities that have been afforded them because they availed themselves to use the advised technological platform. But we cannot run away from one major challenge that comes with the usage of the usage of technology or e-learning for students with disabilities. And that is the issue around cost. That is the issue around cost. Oftentimes, particularly when you have to invest or venture into disability-specific technological devices and aids, they also tend to be relatively on the high side for average parents. What governments like the government of South Africa and the government of Kenya, for instance, have done, even before COVID, to deal with that particular challenge, is to, in the case of South Africa, ensure that these devices are actually made available to the students, but in school. In the critical case of Kenya, for instance, they actually ensure that they've set up some fund to which the student can apply to purchase the assistive device. So you would realize when I indicated earlier on that cost is not really an issue today where e-learning is concerned. It is because there are practices or best practices that have actually shown that as soon as you build certain pillars, you would ensure that students with disabilities are easily participating. What am I driving at? Where higher education is concerned, it is time for management of respective higher education institutions to begin to look at what models they can implement to place technology in the hands of their students with disability, and also reinforce the fact that without these students getting onto the technological page, they will be left behind. And let me quickly tell the story. We've had, because the teaching of assistive technology and its usage at the University of Ghana is a non-gradable course, we had a situation where you have some visually impaired students often giving excuses why they cannot show up to participate in the training. However, when we were presented with the issue of COVID-19 and the need to mandatorily use the e-learning platforms, these students who could not make time to actually learn were now knocking my doors every day to make sure they can be brought on board to have their knowledge built to utilize the platform. So basically, if indeed policymakers do two things: one, ensure that appropriate remedies are put in place to deal with making the devices and the technology available, we will be making a headway through various interventions that they can dream up. And then two, ensuring on the other hand that the end users also have a change in their perspective regarding the society today vis-a-vis the society yesterday.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I would invite Angela and Derek to also respond briefly, and also urge you all to put your questions right after we are going to move into the Q&A session. Please go ahead and put all your questions there, and then I will pose it to our eminent experts to respond. So for attendance, if you want to ask any question, kindly go ahead and put it in the Q&A session. Angela, so what should we begin to think about? And you can take it from the basic education, junior education, secondary school level. What should we begin to think about? And if you can add some of your contextual experience on, the continent, that would be helpful.
Thank you. So, Millicent, just to add a little bit to what Alex said on the higher education, I think that one area that we need to look at is actually the design of the website when they're uploading the courses, because it also has to be accessible so that students with visual impairment can navigate. Otherwise, it will be a challenge too. I think that lecturers also have to be trained on these e-learning platforms so that they can be able to support our learners. Now, coming back to the senior high and then the basic level, currently, as I said, we are trying to put in a system, what we call the universal design for learning, to ensure that all learning is accessible to these students by providing the various ways that we can teach each and every child. I'm giving you an example, just like Alex said. Currently in Kenya, students have been given what we call the Orbit Reader. This Orbit Reader, you can read Braille on it. At the same time, you can have access, by using your flash drive or memory card and things like that. And so students will have various ways of accessing the information, in various forms. The same way, we have just started working on some documents for students with hearing, students with hearing loss. And what we have done is that we have got sign language interpreters to put all these systems in sign language so that these students can also be watching and then following the lessons. I think these are important techniques that we can put in there. Lastly, we are also looking at even those with visual impairment. Like I told you, there is this student who says, I have low vision. All he needs is an assistive device to be able to access the information, online, and that would be helpful. There are some of them also who really need, just like Alex said, the laptop, put in what we call the JAWS software, help them to assess the whole, the computer, assess what is being put out there. Once they are able to access it, we are all on the same page, you see. But if we think that they don't need that support, it's a challenge. When we bring the word challenge, we make life difficult for everyone. Now it looks as if parents are now suffering to buy these assistive devices for their learners. So I will crave on the indulgence of the government and other stakeholders to ensure that they support these learners so that they can all, because it is actually the responsibility of the government to support these ones. If you are providing a textbook for a child without a disability or a student without a disability? Why can't you provide the accessible format for that student who has a disability? So that is what I can say for now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. And Derek, what should we begin to think about now that, you know, before you could send your child to that school and you know, pass on as a parent that responsibility to the teacher or the institution to take care of their education. Now we've all been sent home, including persons with different forms of disability, and parents will now have to take on this responsibility in assisting their children. What should we begin to think about as we design education in general, you know, but also broadly? Who are the stakeholders, and how do we ensure that moving forward, as this pandemic has given us opportunity to reimagine education, what should we begin to think about when it comes to holistic involvement of all the stakeholders in reimagining education for persons with disabilities?
All right, thank you, Millicent. That's a really good question. And I'll approach it from the stakeholder perspective. I think that the first person, most important person possibly is the student. But now that the student is home, the closest people to the student are the guardian and the parents of that student. I think that what we need to be doing in terms of redefining education in this important time is to involve parents in the academic journeys of the students, right? We need to be able to try to involve the parents to understand or integrate the parents into what the child is learning and what the child needs to learn, so that for parents who can be able to support, they are well guided, so that they can be able to provide that support to the child. If parents are not available, I believe that the government has a responsibility to provide that support system, you know, to the student. So if we could have support workers, because you see, once we bridge the gaps, the students stop to become disabled. They actually become students. But when there is a gap, that is when you see disability, right? But when the gaps are bridged with the necessary support systems, you don't find any barrier. So we need to integrate the students, and where there are no parents for, integrate the parents, and where there are no parents for the students, we provide a support worker or a facilitator to be able to support the student. Like I shared earlier, if we can group them into a group of 4 or 5, that can still happen. I think that I think there has to be a relationship between employers, parents, higher education institutions, to be able to train our students for the new era. Because I believe that COVID-19 is going to stay with us. And how do we ensure that students become relevant? Because what we need to keep in mind is we don't only want to educate them, we want them to be educated to create value. And I think that there is an opportunity in exploring internships. By exploring internships, we understand the possible barriers that the students can face in a time like this, so that parents, institutions, and employers can all work around creating a more sustainable opportunity for the students in question. But when we don't explore that, then we don't have any plan on how we want to integrate the students in the world of work, especially in COVID-19. So this is a time where employers, institutions, and parents have to start exploring what will an internship look like. Can we do 1? Can we do 2? Can we do 3? Can the employers learn from that experience? Can institutions understand what exactly employers need, so that the institution can train the student to fit the needs of employers, so that the student can become valuable? Can parents understand what institutions and employers and the role they have to play? I know a mother who would never allow her son to take public transport on his own, or never allow the son to walk out on his own. And I'm like, we need to be able to integrate your son into the community, because you will not always be there, right? So parents need to understand that they have a role to play, and they need to work with these stakeholders to make sure that these things work. And one last thing I want to talk about is the curriculum. I realized in my studies and research that when students with disability do project-based work, it's more beneficial to them. We need to start thinking about how do we redesign our curriculum in a way that it is project-based. Once we create it in a project-based, they get self-esteem because remember, they're alone. So we have to think about their psychological needs. We need to think about how their confidence is boosted. When we give them the chance to go through the normal system, they can easily get frustrated because they don't feel like they are moving forward, they are progressing. But once we make it a project-based format where that helps them to learn, they are able to know that, okay, I've reached this milestone, I boost my confidence, I boost my self-esteem, and I'm encouraged to even move on. So these are the few things that I'll advise.
Right, thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but we're going to take a couple of questions before we go. And the first question I see in our Q&A box is coming from Lami. And Lami is asking that we talk about persons with disability, looking at the physical disabilities we can see. So the blind, the people who have problems with mobility, you know, the ones that we can see. And she's asking, what about persons with, you know, other forms of disabilities, which is not so glaring that you can't see? So people who have mental, you know, forms of disability, emotional forms of disability, and other non-visual disabilities. How are we thinking about such students as well? So any of you can take this briefly, and then we can take maybe one or two more before we wrap up.
Oh, okay, maybe I just want to quickly take this to indicate that, so again, that's the advantage technology brings on board. Technology actually allows you to factor in the needs of a lot more diverse categories of disability, i.e. those with learning disability, whether it is dyslexia, dysgraphia, among others. It is indeed it is indeed easier now to deal with this. But then we must also insist that, like the University of Ghana is currently doing, we are running the Sakai platform for e-learning, but we have also made sure that the disability protocols in relation to students undergoing assessment is also followed. So if you are a student with any form of, you know, disability that requires you, for instance, to use additional time for your assessment, whichever lecturer is dealing with you is informed about ensuring that that is done. So once we identify your peculiar need, it is communicated to the lecturer or the person running the academic service, and that individual is able to ensure that you are dealt with. So again, it is about ensuring that you identify yourself as a person with disability and what your disability is, and discussing what your peculiar needs are, so that we do not end up also depriving other people access to education just because we are looking at it from a more general viewpoint.
Okay.
So, Millicent, just to add, yes,
Yeah.
just to add on to that, just like she said, there are a lot of disabilities that you can't see. And one of them is learning disability, like Alex said. And that is why we are thinking of introducing what we call this universal design for learning. With this project that I'm doing at ADA, you see all these children in the class, but the teacher has been able to identify each one of them based on, you know, sometimes they tell you that you are not good in math, you are not good in English, but there might be, you know, a challenge because it is the strategy that we are using, which might not be good for the student. And so with the introduction of UDL, it makes it easy for all of us to help each of these children to be able to access the same information, but using various formats. And so you can be teaching, let's say 1+1. Some students can write in their book 1+1, others can draw it in the sand, Others can just pick objects. You see, it's the same concept you are teaching, but you are using various forms. And so these are the new trends that we are thinking that it will help each child, you know, or each student to be able to access the same information, but with different formats, so that together we can have them on the same page.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I would want to take another question before we move on. Selena is asking that where do we direct persons with disability to get support, especially in this time of the pandemic? So is there a repository? Is there a place where all of these amazing technologies and assistive devices, is there some form of repository that you can direct persons with disability to go to, either to get that physical support or the online support? And maybe in terms of context, if we can talk about Ghana, because that is our context now. Is there a place where you can direct persons with disability to get some form of support in terms of what is being done in that assistive technology space?
Okay, yeah, Millicent, thanks so much for that question from Selena. First and foremost, as I indicated earlier on, one of the things you can actually use to guide you is the WCAG. That's the Web Content Accessibility Guide. So as a person with disability, or as a student or as a learner, try and get the WCAG and then, or the WCAG, sorry, and then make sure you are versed with this content in relation to what your peculiarities are, so that the next thing you will do is find out who is responsible for building your institution's web content, and then make your challenges known, and you can go ahead to propose what can be done if they show limited knowledge. Other than that, when you take an institution like the University of Ghana, you have the Office of Students with Special Needs, where when you take University of Cape Coast, they have a similar center called the Resource Center for Persons with Disabilities, and the University of Education has same. KNUSC has a similar facility. Find out these places in your institution, and if the institution does not have one, it is advisable that the institution actually ensures that they set up some space within that institution that takes the needs of students with disabilities on board. And forgive me, but one other thing we have actually done inadvertently is to focus overly on students with disabilities. In actual fact, there are also lecturers with disability who must be factored into, the e-learning space, and in relation to what their peculiar needs are, to deliver effectively and efficiently. So if the institution sets up the entity that takes on board the needs of all this category of persons with disabilities in the institution, they will go a long way in ensuring that there is equality and there's better accessibility.
Okay, thank you
and
very much.
Yeah. Melissa, just to add on, in the field of education, or the special education division is also available. I think we have a lot of these NGOs who are also working in the field of education, like the Ghana Blind Union. I think we also have the Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations, which is actually the umbrella of most of these disability NGOs as well. And so we can also fall on them for any information that we need. So I think that is what I can add to what Alex said.
Okay, time is fast spent. I see we have some more questions. We're gonna take our very last one, and I would want you, Derek, to begin with this, and then we'll wrap up our session. So there's a question from Frances Tremantin, who is asking that with this new normal comes new competencies that students must, have to transition to the world of work. What are you seeing to be some of these competencies that, whether at Angela's level, you know, at the teacher education, primary, secondary education, or Alex's level at the tertiary education, what are some of the competencies that you foresee as a social, you know, entrepreneur who works in this space that they should be thinking about, you know, inculcating or be more intentional to ensure that the new world of work is, you know, persons with disability are given these competencies in their training so they will be relevant when they finish their training?
Thank you, Millicent. I think, like we've mentioned several times, we cannot rule out the ability to be digital. Like, you cannot have an excuse not to know how to use the laptop or use the phone or just basically work online, because with what is typical about the new world or the new way of doing things is the fact that we live in a digital world. So I think that as resource persons, as teachers, as universities and institutions, we need to prioritize developing the digital skills of the students. It doesn't matter whether they have the mobility to type or they can be able to see or not, right? So if you have a student who has possibly has cerebral palsy and has some motor challenges, what resources, right, can we implement to ensure that this person can be digital? It could be the speech to test, right? There are different technologies that can bridge that digital gap. And so it's possible that every student with disability, no matter the form of disability, can go digital. I think the next thing that we need to think about is the ability to create. And we need to develop students to be entrepreneurial, right? They should be able to think about problems and create solutions for these problems. Because the truth is, a lot more people are losing jobs, and so many people have lost jobs, right? And so it's going to be extra difficult to think about fighting for jobs. But what if you can take a problem and solve? And I always say, problem solving is not only restricted to individuals who are not disabled. Everybody can solve a problem. Everybody has the mental capacity. So as institutions, we need to start thinking about how do we develop our students to become problem solvers in a way that when they don't get access to employment, they can actually start businesses on their own. You know, and I think that one last thing we need to start thinking about is self-confidence. How can we help our students, our disabled students, to build their confidence? Because what you realize is a lot of students with disability, unfortunately, have very low self-esteem. So when you even put them in an environment, they doubt themselves, and it takes them a long while to be able to adapt. And in a time like this, you need to prove yourself. You need to be able to be confident to prove yourself. And so these are the three things, which is one, digital literacy, entrepreneurial development, and then boosting their confidence. So I would say that we should focus on these three things in our approach to make them relevant for the new world.
Well, thank you very much. We couldn't have had this amazing session without your input. So Alex, Derek, Angela, we really, really are happy that you are actually engaging in this conversation in the various spaces that you work in. My takeaway is intentionality, intentionality, intentionality. We shouldn't go way ahead and then now come back to bring up persons with disability. As we make new policies, as we think about what education is going to look like, we have to carry these persons along and be very intentional in our policies, in our attitude, in what we think, even when they finish, what it will take to transition them into the world of employment. Well, attendees, thank you very much for participating in this session. We are going to bring the session to a close here, and we in whatever capacity that you work in the educational space, please ensure that you are engaging, and you are very intentional in thinking about persons with other forms of ability in the educational space in whatever work you do. Thank you very much, and we'll see you another time.